Ari joins us on 365 Sports. And your thoughts about the top 25, especially early in the year, and just using the recruiting rankings?
Yeah, I mean, it's ridiculous. I mean, look at these resumes for these teams. How on earth can you be ranking them where they are? I mean, Clemson's resume is ridiculously bad. How are they a top 10 team? It's as if they get a birthright that gives them the top 10 ranking no matter what. I mean, BYU beat arguably the best team in the ACC and held them without a touchdown. They haven't lost yet. Same too with Iowa State, who beat Iowa in the non-conference. They haven't lost yet either. How are they ranked behind two one-loss teams in Ole Miss and Clemson? Ole Miss lost at home to Kentucky. I mean, it's almost as if the AP says only Big Ten or SEC teams can be ranked inside the top 10. It doesn't make any sense. And here's the thing, too, guys. It matters. The AP Top 25 ranking matters because while it's not a complete analog to the college football playoff rankings, they absolutely use it as a data point to rank their teams once they start ranking teams in early November. So, I mean, I thought Missouri was foolishly ranked number 9 last week. Obviously, they get housed by Texas A&M. I wasn't sure A&M should have been ranked 25th based on the resume. I mean, I get why we do the preseason rankings, but I feel like a lot of these writers are just completely lazy in how they lay this thing out for the AP Top 25 by not looking at resumes. You're just looking at the logo for BYU and ranking them 14th, despite the fact that they're 5-0 and have really good wins. Kansas State and SMU, to name two of them, they have the number 1 strength of schedule. Texas Tech has won 4 games. They're the only team in the country, Texas Tech, that has won 4 games this year against plus 500 teams right now. 4 wins against plus 500 teams right now. How are they not in the top 25? It is absurd. I even think Pitt is probably lower than it should be at 22. So, yeah, I mean, a lot of it seems like has to do more with recruiting rankings than it does what you've done in an actual season, because there's no way that Clemson or Ole Miss, for that matter, should be in the top 10. And by the way, Alabama losing at Vanderbilt probably should have dropped them more than the 6 spots they dropped.
Ole Miss, not only you mentioned that, they moved they moved back in 3. They went back into the top 10 for what they've done. But go ahead, Paul.
Yeah, Ari, the Big 12 continues to be chaotic, except everywhere but in Provo and in Ames, and particularly with Iowa State. They didn't play their best early against Baylor. Baylor was right in the game. And then the minute that Baylor started to kind of lose their grip, Iowa State just ripped it away, like completely, to where they took away any momentum they had. What is it particularly about this Matt Campbell team that allows them to do that?
Yeah, I mean, though Baylor scored coming out of half, I think the punt return for touchdown, because Baylor was really in control of this game. It was 14-3, and then, you just can't give them extra points. To answer your question, Paul, it's the offense that they have. I mean, we've seen them have good offenses. I mean, Brock Purdy, look what he's doing in the NFL, and we saw at times with him and the running game with Breece Hall. But we've never seen kind of the full complement of what they have, whether it be Higgins on the outside, Noel from the slot, the stable of running backs. We saw in this game, the emergence of Johnson in a way that we haven't seen. We've been expecting it from Abu Samba. So I just think they have such a lot more upside from an offensive perspective than what we're used to. Rocco Beck has become really, really good and consistent. And they're just, even if they're slow out of the gates, like they've been multiple games this year, they tend to figure out what defenses are doing to them over the course of 4 quarters, and they really start to lift off. And we saw that in this game. I mean, again, I thought even though Baylor got that touchdown coming out of the break to go back ahead, it just felt like Baylor had their opportunity to knock them out, and they didn't do it. And Iowa State's offense was none the wiser with how they finished this game with, touchdown, field goal, whatever it was. You just can't have empty possessions, and I thought there were too many early on for Baylor where they really could have taken control of that game, and then late just because they have so much offensive firepower.
Texas Tech started off with a nearly disastrous opener. Were able to pull that shootout out against Abilene Christian, got beat up good by Washington State, but since then they've just grinded out wins, man. Like, they play so hard, Ari. The culture seems like it's thriving there in Lubbock, and that leads to wins like Saturday night where you got up big on the road late at night, you give away the lead, but you fight back, you grab it back, and you seal that game. I was just thoroughly impressed by the effort, not to mention the talent as well. But your thoughts on a Texas Tech team that's sitting there and just winning games week by week and getting the job done.
Yeah, this was a really impressive win for Tech for the reason that they were up big in the first half and then couldn't do anything offensively in the second half. They were up 18-3 at halftime, ended up, I think, towards the end of the third quarter being up 18-6. So kind of both teams struggled, and I thought, credit Texas Tech defense for what they were able to do against Fafita. But when Arizona came back and then took a lead, it just felt at that point like, this can be hard for Texas Tech to be able to overcome. Arizona defensively has figured some stuff out. They had 2 fumbles on Taj Brooks. How rare do you see that? You never see Brooks fumble once, let alone twice. And, to be able to overcome that within the game and then still win the game when your offense, there was at one point, I think, in the fourth quarter, with about 7 minutes left, they had 34 total yards in the second half. And so, a lot of times we see teams where they build that lead and then another team gives them a haymaker and they can't overcome that. And it says a lot about Texas Tech. They're able to do that. The other thing about Tech is they lost to Washington State in a game that Taj Brooks didn't play. And we're starting to see one of the best defensive players in this conference emerge, which is Jacob Rodriguez. This guy was an absolute monster. My guess is he's going to be named Defensive Player of the Week in the Big 12 because he was a beast in this game. He forced a fumble. He pushed a ball out. He was all over the field, 13 tackles. Jacob Rodriguez for Texas Tech is just an absolute beast. And, this is as full of a team win as we've seen for Texas Tech in a long time. This is a team that I think 3 weeks in, we weren't really sure what to make of it and thought, okay, here we go again with Joey McGuire. But now they look like a team that's certainly, firmly in the upper tier of the Big 12 right now.
Who is reeling more? UCF, Kansas, TCU, and we can discuss Baylor as another part of another question. But and Oklahoma State? Think about that, Ari. I know TCU won a couple of weeks ago, but these teams all seem to be like, what in the hell's going on?
Yeah, to me, there's 2 that stand out. One would be Oklahoma State because, and West Virginia winning at Oklahoma State was my underdog pick of the week. I've not been right a lot this year, but, man, that one was obvious. The thing that made Oklahoma State good last year wasn't Alan Bowman, and it wasn't even their defense. It was Ollie Gordon and Colin Oliver. Statistically, defensively, they were bad last year, but they were very much bend but don't break, and then they'd get big plays because of a guy like Colin Oliver who would just create splash plays on defense, would create turnovers, would sack the quarterback, put him behind the chains. And then on the other end, Ollie Gordon. His running ability made it so easy for Alan Bowman to operate. So when you remove both of those guys from the equation, Gordon not being effective at all and Colin Oliver being out basically since week 2, it shouldn't be a surprise what we're seeing right now. Alan Bowman has been so ineffective, and the problem is we've seen what's behind him in Garrett Rangel, and it's not much better. And I guess at this point, Zane Flores, who was, fairly highly recruited, either he's not ready or what. But at this point, it's hard not to look down your bench and say, what else can I get? Because, without Gordon being effective, you just see how ineffective Alan Bowman is at quarterback. It's not like he got worse from last year. I just think the offense around him is worse, and that's made it a lot more difficult on him. And then on the defense end, this is the same defense we saw last year from a statistical standpoint. They gave up a ton of yards. They were really at the bottom of the Big 12 and around the country, in terms of yards per game, in terms of, a lot of the defensive metrics, but it was Colin Oliver that just was so disruptive. So I think you remove those guys, and it's kind of obvious what you're seeing right now. Not a very good football team at all. I think a lot of people expected them to bounce back this past week and not fall to 0-3 in Big 12 play. But, with the Mike Gundy effect, but I don't see it, and I didn't see it going into that game. The other one is UCF. It's been 2 brutal weeks with UCF after it looked like they were going to be one of the elite teams in the Big 12 because of their running game. And now we hear there's 5 players who are going to, or 6 players, including their kicker, who are, basically taking a red shirt to transfer out. One of those is Xavier Townsend, another guy that was a, Swiss Army knife of sorts for Gus Malzahn to use. So suddenly there's something happening beneath the surface here at UCF that's maybe a little bit more than we can tell. It's certainly losing 6 guys in the middle of the season that say we're going to redshirt and then potentially leave the program. That says a lot. This was a elite running game with Penny Boone, with R.J. Harvey, with Townsend, with everything that they had. And the last 2 weeks, they've been brutally bad. And it reflects on KJ Jefferson. Jefferson is not a very good quarterback. He's much better when he's got, when the team is running at 5, 6, 7 yards a carry. This week they were at 108 yards total over their carries, 2.7 per carry. Like that is not a recipe for UCF to be successful. So certainly, like, those are two teams where, when you ask who's reeling the most right now, I would say them. I mean, my Jayhawks probably the worst team right now in the Big 12, but I've never been more optimistic about them this season because Jalen Daniels actually played well on Saturday. It was their defense that just couldn't get stopped. There were 5 consecutive touchdown drives at the end of that game, and unfortunate for Kansas, Arizona State was the one with the ball last. Their defense was probably gassed. I mean, both teams were playing in those conditions. I'm not trying to, say it was tougher on Kansas than it was on Arizona State, but they were gassed in that 100-degree heat they were playing at Arizona State. So I guess I'm more optimistic about my Jayhawks simply because I have been waiting to see Jalen Daniels play better, and this was as good of a game as he's played all year.
I'm going to throw this theory out to you, Ari, because it applies to the Big 12 in particular. Seventh-year quarterbacks are not a good thing.
I mean, yes and no. I mean, obviously, if you're good enough, you're probably not going to last 7 years. And I think Utah is in pretty good shape with Cam Rising. So that's one. Like, Cam Rising is just a better quarterback than most of these guys. I mean, Bowman just hasn't been a good quarterback. It was aided last year by Ollie Gordon and then Brennan Presley. I mean, it was basically those two guys that stole the show for Oklahoma State last year. So everything's regressed. So, I mean, look, I think, Paul, you're not completely wrong because, look, there's a reason. If guys are staying that long in college, there's a reason for it. If you're good enough, usually you can move on to the NFL. But we've also seen guys have a lot of success, being 6-, 7-year quarterbacks as well. So I think it makes you obviously more experienced. And plus, it also matters how many years you've been within the same system. It obviously matters what's around you. But, yeah, a lot of times if you've been there for 7 years, there's a reason why you haven't moved on to the next level.
So that Houston-TCU game on Friday night was super interesting, not only because of the results. Houston gets a Big 12 win that I don't think anybody was really expecting, but we got to see Zion Chris before he got hurt. Donovan Smith able to close that game out. They play good defense. It's a rough up and down year, but still a very promising year in year one for Houston. On the other side of this, TCU, which had a lot of promise coming in, no run game, bad defense, and Josh Hoover's great, but he turns the ball over too much. I was just gobsmacked by that result. I wasn't expecting that, Ari. I don't know about you, but how much of a concern do you have about TCU, not just as a football team, but kind of as a program right now? It just feels like something is very off within the walls there in Fort Worth, or am I missing something?
No, I think you're 100% right, Craig. I mean, I think, there are a lot of things I've read and seen now coming out of Fort Worth that are wondering, how much leeway does a berth and a berth and then a win in the college football playoff get you for Sonny Dykes? Because you would expect this team to be a lot better than it is, and it's the consistency. I mean, Houston and TCU are like the epitome of inconsistent at this point in time, and so I think we thought maybe TCU was figuring some stuff out. They beat Kansas in an impressive win, and then completely lay an egg. It's twofold for me. So let's start with Houston. I thought we were going to see Zion Chris in the game of the week before against Iowa State. And maybe Willie Fritz was a little worried about throwing him to the Wolves against an Iowa State defense. But, I mean, you had back-to-back games where you didn't score and you were shut out. Zion Chris gives you a much better, running threat than Donovan Smith does at this point of his career. And I just, at this point, don't care about the upside Donovan may give you in the passing game. So I'm surprised he kind of took Willie Fritz as long as it did to get to Zion Chris because he's just obviously the better option at this point in time, and I think has been the last couple of weeks. Donovan Smith, we talk about those 7-year quarterbacks or whatever he is, 6-year quarterbacks. We've seen already the best, I think, of Donovan Smith, and the worst is certainly in front of him. So, I think everybody was surprised to see Chris. And then, this is a team that was shut out in back-to-back weeks. I mean, they barely scored 30 points all year. They did in one game, but beyond that, it's been tough for them to score. So the fact that they got so many points in the first half probably threw TCU for a loop in that one. The other part to this I'll say is with TCU, with regards to TCU, I wish, and this probably isn't Sonny Dykes' fault, but, I talk about this with Lance Leipold in Kansas, and that is, when Leipold came in, they were switching from a 3-man front to more of a 4-man front. And, they really had to upgrade their personnel to do so. I mean, we know that, right? You're going to need different body styles, different body types of players along your defensive line when you're running an odd man front versus an even man front. So I think TCU is transitioning right now from more of a 3-man front they were running under Joe Gillespie to that 4-man traditional under Andy Avalos. And I like the fact that we expected them to be, or I say we, but it seems like the expectations are much higher for them without sort of understanding defensively that this was going to be a year in transition, especially when you understand that they lost their best interior defensive lineman to the portal this year, in Williams. So in some ways I'm not surprised because it does take time to transition from that odd man to that even man front personnel-wise. I think Sonny felt like maybe they had a little bit better personnel up front than they do coming into this season, but it's just you got to have a little bit of patience in terms of turning over rosters and having a completely new defensive scheme. And then when it comes to Hoover, it's funny because I think it was either going to the Kansas game or the week before where he had not thrown an interception the entire season. He'd put up some big numbers, had gone a really long stretch without throwing a pick, and now it's like he can't turn it off. Now all he's doing is throwing picks. But I mean, it certainly doesn't help when you can't run the football. And so it's like they can't play defense, they can't run the football. How good are you going to be?
Ari, Baylor the week before against BYU was down 28-7. Then they put on this surge in the second half, but eventually still had 3 possessions, couldn't close the deal. They open up 14-3 at Iowa State and look good doing it. There's a note here. The teams they've lost to this year are combined 18-2. The teams they have left on their schedule are under 500. Are you surprised, or your thoughts about, and we have our opinion, obviously we cover them, on Dave Aranda and the hot seat and his future?
Yeah, I mean, it just feels like there's very little he can do at this point in time based on their current record to save his job. Maybe I'm wrong. But, I mean, also, we just talked about this with TCU. If you can't play defense, if you can't run the football, how good are you going to be?
Yep.
I mean, they're putting this all on Sawyer Robertson. I mean, he was one of my players of the week this week. But, I mean, how many times did he throw the football? The whole deal is built on him. So, I mean, I see the schedule opening up to your point, and there's maybe some reason for optimism there, but you got to be able to run the football. Without Sawyer Robertson, it's putting so much on him. And when you consider that coming into the season, we thought this was DeQuan Finn's team, and now here we are, week 6, heading into week 7, and it's all Sawyer Robertson. It's just really tough. I mean, look, they've got pieces. I mean, Hal Presley's been impressive. I think I thought coming into the year they'd have a really good receiving core. But I mean, defensively they've got to figure some stuff out, and then they got to get their running game going. Maybe they do against lesser opponents, but it's just so tough to win when your quarterback is throwing 40, 50, 60 times a game and you can't run the football. And that's been what Baylor's been the last few weeks, certainly.
And if you then all of a sudden have 1 or 2 things going well, you get a punt blocked. I mean, completely unblocked, a punt blocked. A field goal you missed at the end, near the end, that could have sewn up the Colorado game. That's what losing teams do, man. That's what they do. Ari Temkin with us, Big 12 radio, on TuneIn Radio with us on 365 Sports.
So, Ari, how much is Iowa State, BYU front runners right now based on record. Colorado looks like they're doing something. Where do you put Utah in all this, given the uncertainty around how badly Cam Rising's fingers hurt?
Yeah, I mean, I think at this point, until we see it, we have to expect that he's not going to play, right? I mean, how can we, given the history here? And then not only that, but if he does come back, or when he comes back, can he stay healthy? Can he stay on the field? Right? It's not just a matter of getting back and getting on the field. It's, okay, this guy missed an entire year. He comes back and he gets hurt again, cutting his hand, because he just, you don't want to rein it in. You want this guy to be the full version of himself, because, you're not getting the full picture of it if he's not. But at the same time, like, he's not proven he can stay healthy. And, obviously Isaac Wilson has looked good at times, but he's still a true freshman, and he's, what's your upside with a true freshman versus a guy like Cameron Rising that has just a lot more upside? We talked last week about Utah could potentially be the team that gets the second bid to the Big 12, but that doesn't work unless Cam Rising comes back and is back for the rest of the year. because then you have a built-in excuse if you're Utah that says, hey, we've got a loss here, but you know what? That loss was when we didn't have Cam Rising and we went 2-1 during that stretch. So, it's hard to judge Utah at this point because they're the best team in the Big 12 when Cam Rising's healthy. But it's a big when because we haven't seen him back yet, and we keep hearing noise about when he's coming back. I would expect him to be back this Saturday based on what we heard before. But again, we heard last year that he'd be back and never came back. So who knows? And then again, once he comes back, is it a ticking time bomb before he's hurt again? I hate to say that, but at this point, we can go off of only the things that we've seen, and that's what we've seen.
So, Ari, 5 games this week. 4 of the 5 games have a ranked team in them. They're all national TV, which is great, including a couple of Saturday night games with Iowa State, West Virginia, and then Kansas State, Colorado. What game are you kind of eyeing the most this week?
Yeah, I'm trying to remember. I had the list in front of me here. Let me try and pull it up again.
K-State, Colorado, Iowa State, West Virginia, Arizona, BYU, Cincy, UCF, and Friday night gets it started, Utah at Arizona State.
Yeah, so, it's the night games for me, the 3 of them, the Friday night game and then the 2 on Saturday. The biggest one, though, is Iowa State, West Virginia. West Virginia is obviously 3-2, but they're sneaky because they're 2-0 in the Big 12 now and just had that resounding win on the road against Oklahoma State. Now they get Iowa State and Kansas State in back-to-back weeks at home. So, this is a huge game for them. We saw Nico Marchiol came into that game. He was highly recruited at quarterback. He's been there for a few years. He didn't miss a beat when Garrett Green got hurt. I'd love to see more of him because I think he just gives you a lot more upside, from a passing standpoint. Green is just so inconsistent. His completion percentage is so low, and it was the case last year. You thought, well, maybe that will change this year, but at least right now, it doesn't look like it. And I love Marchiol, but it got a robust running game. They ran basically 8 yards a carry against Oklahoma State, whether it's Jaheim White or C.J. Donaldson, plus the quarterback. They've just got a lot there. And then I think defensively, they've improved dramatically over the start of their season where they were really hemorrhaging yards, especially through the air. So West Virginia is extremely underrated, and I'm not just saying that because I picked them to win the Big 12 this year. But the fact that they're 2-0 very sneakily after losing 2 games in the non-conference, this is a big stretch here for them where they could, if they knocked off Iowa State and Kansas State in consecutive weeks at home, now all of a sudden they're in the driver's seat. With that being said, though, I think they at least win one of these 2 against Iowa State or Kansas State. If they win both of them, it'd be a miracle, but I think they definitely get one. And then, Colorado, it's funny because you had 3 of the 4 ranked teams in the Big 12 on a bye last week, and then not to mention Colorado that's unranked, but it's coming off its most impressive win against UCF, where it was able to run the ball effectively and protect Shedeur Sanders. So, if they can keep that up, then they're a team to be reckoned with because they've got arguably the best quarterback in the conference in Shedeur Sanders, and their defense is very salty. It's very underrated. I love what their new defensive coordinators come in to do and has really turned this thing around. They've got some players, but, last year, if you remember, they could not block anybody on offense, and they could not do anything defensively to get stops. They're definitely stopping people right now on defense. In terms of their offensive line, we obviously saw them get sacked 8 times against Baylor in that game. The sack numbers were down against UCF, and I think that was a big reason why they were so effective. But it kind of remains to be seen how good that offensive line truly is, or better it is. But if it is improved with that improved defense, Colorado is definitely a team that can win this conference.
Craig, what were you going to make a comment about with BYU?
No, I was just going to mention big noon kickoffs at BYU this weekend for Arizona. So that's ought to be a nice setting. Hopefully they fare better than the last Big 12 host, UCF, in their big noon kickoff showcase.
Yeah, I think that, UCF had a massive crowd. BYU will pack that area up. That'll be hellacious to see. Ari, it's kind of fun. We're starting to see things take shape, and yet again, we still don't know exactly about a lot of these teams because they're going to start beating each other up. I love it. I think the Big 12 is so entertaining, not because we cover it, but because it is. And I just asked everyone in the chat, give me your top 5 right now, and I guarantee you it's not just real simple to name it off. It's just it would take some time to, well, wait a minute, what about them? Thanks, buddy. Sorry about the technical issues on the video. We'll figure that out for you next Monday, and thank you for your time. Good luck tomorrow with your show and the rest of the week.
Appreciate you, Smokey. Take care, guys. And, I think if you asked 100 people to rank the top 5 teams in the Big 12 right now, you get 100 different answers.
I think
incredible.
I think so. I really do. I think you'll get so many combinations like a Rubik's Cube. That's Ari Temkin every morning Big 12 radio on TuneIn Radio. Here, for example, and I know we got Phil Bennett around the corner, Kyle, his top 5, BYU, Utah, Iowa State, West Virginia, and then he said, oh, my God, one more team. Here's
yeah, that's the problem. Like 5 on is pretty much a crapshoot.
Yeah, it is. This is from UT Parking, Iowa State, BYU, Kansas State, Texas Tech, and West Virginia. Kim said, Kim, you're not telling the truth. Iowa State, K-State, BYU, West Virginia, and Houston. Kim is not allowing us to put Texas Tech too high on the pedestal.
I'm starting the hype train.
Yep, I am too.
He wants to keep him humble.